Hey guys. All right, today's day 11 of My Survival, a Girl on Schindler's List, and today we are going to read Chapter 10, 1944 to 45, War's End. And today we are going back to probably the most important standard ever. Not ever, but the most important standard for an informational text, which is main idea. So our standard is RI 4.2. That R stands for reading. The I stands for informational, and that's the type of text that we're going to read through. The 4 is for 4th grade. And the 2 is for the second informational standard in 4th grade, and that is main idea that we're going to read through. All right. So our I can statement is I can determine the main idea of a text or a part of a text and tell how it is supported with key details. All right, ready? Mirrors on. I can determine the main idea of a text or a part of a text and tell how it is supported with key details. Mirrors off. All right, so let's talk about some of those important words. Main idea. Hold on 1 second. I am at my mom's house because I'm babysitting my niece right now. And her TV is really loud, so I'm going to tell her to turn it down for me. My niece is asleep. Turn the TV down, please. All right, so let's talk about some of those important words. Our verb. Our first verb is determine. What does that mean? If we're determining something, we're just telling it, figuring it out, right? So we're determining the main idea. What is a main idea? What does that mean? If we ask you for the main idea of a text, what does that mean? Second question, can you find the main idea of a literary text? We'll talk about that in a minute. Now, today we're going to talk more about how the main idea of a text, we can talk about the whole text, or we can also talk about a part of a text, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. And tell, we know what it means to tell. And then key details. What are key details? She apologizes. Key details are those smaller things that support or prove that main idea as we go, right? All right, let's do it. Okay, so when we talk about main idea, we think about that ice cream cone, right? And our main idea is the bottom piece because we can't have a text without a main idea, right? And that bottom cone, you can't have an ice cream if you don't have the cone first, right? So we talk about that bottom cone as the main idea, and we also talk about that point at the bottom, because the main idea is really the author's most important point. So we want to ask ourselves questions like, what is the whole text about? How does the author prove the point? And what does the author want you to know, right? So the main idea, we have to really think about the whole text or the piece of the text that we're being asked about. A lot of times, especially on standardized tests, on LEAP, or on even your weekly test, you might be asked, what is the main idea of the 7th paragraph? Or what is the main idea of the section titled whatever? And it might tell you a subheading or a heading. You might have to go look there and determine the main idea of just that piece of the text, that part of the text. When we look for those key details, if you have your main idea, and again, with testing, a lot of times Part A asks you for the main idea and Part B asks you for the supporting details. So if you're looking for the supporting details, you can turn your main idea into a question, usually a how question or a why question, and that will help you find the key details that you're really looking for, okay? When we look for key details, we want to make sure that we're not finding evidence from the text that just tells us our main idea over again, right? Why are you smart? Not because you're smart, that doesn't give me anything, but because you got A's, because your teacher praises you, because you have a good report card grade. Those are the supporting details, right? So we want to make sure that our supporting details are really supporting our main idea and are not just repeating our main idea, okay? All right, some ways that we can help ourselves to find the main idea. We can read the title and the headings. Those are often going to give us our topic, our word or two words that the whole text is about. We can look for repeated words in the text. Those are going to be important words that we want to include in our main idea. Sometimes in the first part of our main idea sentence even. We want to analyze text features, especially illustrations and pictures. Any visuals that are given to us are going to be really, really important. And we want to reread. Sometimes we can reread the first and last sentences. Sometimes it helps us, sometimes it might not. But most of the time it gives us something, okay? All right. So today we are going to read chapter 10. I want you to think about the main idea of this chapter and what the author wanted us to know after we read it. Okay, so we're just kind of come up with the main idea, think about the supporting details, what was the whole text about, right? We have some pictures here, and the title of our chapter gives us as readers a little bit of hope. The title of chapter 9, which we just read, was Living in a Nightmare. Not very much hope there. But in chapter 10, the title's War's End, right? So that means that the war is going to end. And when we look at these visuals that I have here, this is, guess what that might be? Picture of the prisoners from the concentration camp being set free. And down there is actually a picture of Nazis, the soldiers, being arrested. So we're going to read about how the war starts to end and about Rena's experiences with that ending. And the quote that we're going to focus on today is, "Yet over time, he changed." Who do you think that might be about? All right. Go ahead and open up your text, and we are going to read chapter 10. 1944 to 45, War's End. Remember, we're focusing on that main idea. By January 18th, 1945, it was clear that Germany was about to lose the war, and the Nazis decided the time had come to murder all the remaining Jewish prisoners. We learned later what happened to the prisoners in Auschwitz. Guards lined them up in front of the gates and force-marched them to camps in Germany and Austria. This was one of the worst winters in history, with temperatures dropping to 30 degrees below zero. About 60,000 prisoners departed in columns 5 across, long lines of miserable, freezing human beings made to walk for their lives, death marches as they were called. For days, prisoners marched through the piercing cold and snow. Whoever was too exhausted to continue walking was shot and left to die by the side of the road. That would have been our fate, if not for Oscar. While other prisoners were freezing and starving, we were safe inside his factory. But now, Oscar was in trouble. The Russian forces coming to liberate the camps would not see him as a hero the way we did. They would see him as a Nazi businessman who manufactured ammunition for the German army and had concentration camp prisoners working for him. He would surely be made to stand trial and possibly be hanged for war crimes. The time had come for him to flee. What do you think that word flee means? Let's read on and see if we can use our context clues. In May 1945, with Russian soldiers only a day away, Oscar called for all his workers and all the German guards to gather in the factory. First, he spoke to us. "My children," he said, "you are saved. Germany has lost the war." He then asked that we not go into the neighboring houses to steal anything. "Prove yourself worthy of the millions of victims among you, and refrain from any individual acts of revenge and terror," he said. Then he turned to the Nazi guards and began by thanking them for being humane towards his workers. It was a good strategy to compliment them, because they were Nazi soldiers and quite capable of killing us all before the Russians arrived. "You have a choice," he told the Germans. "You can stay here, wait for the Russians, and be arrested for war crimes. Or you can leave now and return to your families." The choice was simple. Since no one from the German government was there to stop them from leaving, they all turned and walked out of the factory. Then Oskar performed one last act of generosity for his Jewish workers. To each worker, he gave a bottle of vodka, a pair of shoes, and 3 yards of fabric. These rare goods would bring a high price on the black market, and the money would buy us food on our journey home to Krakow. I keep forgetting how to say it. Krakow. We gave him a gift in return, a ring made from a gold tooth donated by one of the Jewish workers, and a letter of appreciation that spelled out his many acts of kindness towards us. Why do you think they gave him a letter of appreciation? Is it just like a thank you card for him? Of just like, here, take this with you. Think about what's about to happen to Oskar. Really, no matter what, he's probably going to get in trouble for being a Nazi, for just being associated with them. So they gave him a letter of appreciation that spelled out his many acts of kindness towards us. Why do you think they did that? Why might that be helpful for Oskar? Then we all formed a line, walked up one by one, and kissed the hands of Oskar and Emily Schindler. Everyone wept to see them leave. I wish I could have done more, he said, but I must leave you now. Auf Wiedersehen. Goodbye. Oskar and Emily drove away. Eventually, they succeeded in reaching the area where American troops were in charge. Because the Americans were arresting all the Nazis they could find, our letter of appreciation helped the Schindlers avoid prison. So now we know that letter wasn't really just like a thank you note for Oskar. It was to try to help make sure that he stayed safe in the arresting of all the Nazis. By May 8, 1945, when Germany surrendered to the Allies, many former Nazis had fled and were living comfortably in hiding. Meanwhile, Oskar had spent all his money to save his workers, and now he was in need of help. For a while, all that he and Emily had to live on were monthly care packages. CARE stood for the Cooperative for American Remittances to Europe, an agency that sent food relief to people at risk of starving at the end of World War II. CARE packages typically contained cans of meat, bags of powdered eggs, boxes of preserves, margarine, sugar, powdered milk, and coffee. Living on such charity was a difficult adjustment for the Schindlers, who had once been wealthy. Eventually, the Jewish community found out that the man who had saved more than 1,000 Jews was himself in need, and leaders of Jewish relief organizations realized they had to do something to help him. Germany was not safe for Oskar, who was attacked in the streets as a Jew lover. In 1949, Jewish organizations arranged for Oskar and Emily to relocate to Argentina, where there were business opportunities and where they could start life anew. For a while, Oskar tried to open a factory in Argentina. For a while, Oskar tried to open a factory in Argentina, but his health was not good and the business failed. In 1957, he went back to Germany, where the Jewish community supported him with monthly checks. In 1964, he suffered a heart attack. His health never recovered. After the war, when the deaths were added up, it was discovered that from 1933, when Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, to 1945, when the war ended. So it was only 12 years. It was 12 years that the war, from start to kind of finish. The Nazis had murdered more than 6 million Jews. Who can even imagine such a number? 6 million innocent men, women, and children. A tragedy so great, it has come to be known as history's darkest hour. During those terrible years, some Christians had taken immense risks to help save Jews. And in the 1950s, the government of Israel awarded these good people the title Righteous Gentiles. Oskar Schindler had not started out in life righteously. So what do you think that word righteous means? If this was awarded, this title was awarded to people who helped Jews during World War II. And then let's read, because she's going to give us some examples of what it means to be not righteous. So it says he did not start out in life righteously. He drank and smoked. He enjoyed the company of women. And his goal in Krakow in the early days of the war was simply to make money. So what do you think it means to be righteous? Probably be fair and kind, right? Generous giving. Yet over time, he changed. He wanted to save his workers, and to do so, he spent all his money bribing Germany officials and purchasing food and medicine. He risked his life and went broke to save me and more than 1,000 other Jewish prisoners. Before he died in 1974 at age 66, he asked to be buried in Jerusalem, the holiest of cities for Jews. Emily died in Germany in 2001 at age 94. In 1993, the government of Israel recognized Oskar and Emily Schindler as righteous Gentiles. Okay, so I want you to think about the main idea of that chapter. So let's go through our steps. Let's reread the title. The title of that chapter was War's End, right? So our main idea is going to be about the war ending. Now I want you to think about some of those repeated words in this chapter. One I think was repeated was righteous, right? Oskar was repeated throughout there a lot. Jews was repeated. Maybe Nazis, probably World War II. Some of those words were repeated, right? So now we're going to think about how we could combine all of those words and all those ideas into one sentence that could tell us what that whole chapter was really about. What was the author's point in telling us that chapter? All right, kiddos. Love you, miss you, mean it, and I'll see you soon for chapter 11.